Welcome once again to another study from the book of 2 Samuel, this time chapters 13 and 14. I'm Mike Hughes, your teacher for this series, brought to you by the Spring Hill Church of Christ, meeting at 405 Butler Street, Spring Hill, Louisiana, located on the big motorway off of 371. We are in the United Kingdom, the section of Scripture we're in the Old Testament, and that covers Saul, David, Solomon, up to 931 BC. We are in the middle of this United Kingdom, studying David. We have seen a lot of things going on with David, and we're studying in this lesson 2 Samuel chapters 13 and 14. So far, we've learned David is a troubled man. We normally think about David, king of Israel, a man after God's own heart, solid as a rock, able to fight a giant, faith never wavers, a type of Christ, a great man. But I ask, would you trade places with David? That is the big question. Whether you would want to be in his place and go through his troubles. He gets himself into trouble due to his carelessness. Most of his life, he's been on the run. He's shed many tears. He's weeping very deep. And we're looking at a man that is totally convicted in God. Never has a deep inward problem he's had to deal with. A man who could write the Psalms, and only, one who could write those Psalms, who deal with those different things, a broken heart, devastated, one that doesn't know what to do, where to turn sometime. Only thing he can do is throw himself at God's feet. Total competence in God. Now, that's what we begin to see. On this chart, we see the plot development for 2 Samuel. And I want you to notice this with me. We see beginning 7 years in Hebron, reigning there. We see that he had political triumphs, chapter 1 through chapter 5. He had spiritual triumphs, chapter 6, chapter 7, military triumphs, and then we come to chapter 11, and there we see David's transgressions. With this study, we are going to be looking at David's troubles in his house and David's troubles within the kingdom, and really caused by his own son. And so we'll see this. This is what we're going to see beginning in our study in chapter 13 today. A listing, part 3, the troubles of David. Troubles in his house, chapter 12, 1 through 13:36. We see prophecy by Nathan, chapter 12, 1 through 14. We've seen that. David's son dies. We saw that in our last lesson. This lesson, we're going to see incest in David's house. Amnon is murdered, one of his sons. And then another son is going to cause trouble in his kingdom. And we're going to begin to notice chapter 14. Rebellion, the rebellion of Absalom against David. All this has been prophesied by Nathan, the prophet to David. And so Absalom and Tamar, as we begin this study, are full brothers and sisters. And that means they have the same mother, same father, David and Michal, daughter of the king of Geshur. Ammon, on the other hand, another character that comes in here, is Absalom and Tamar's half-brother by a different mother. His mother is Ahinoam. And so that's the relationship we're about to see in this story. So we begin to read chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and after a time Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said, "O son of David, why are you so haggard morning after morning?" Haggard is kind of like the English term, the Great Britain term, United Kingdom term, knackered. N-A-C-K, I believe, A-R-D, knackered, or N-A-C-A-R-D, and which seemingly means you're just tired. Some of us used to call that tuckered out. I remember, I don't know if that was somebody named Tucker that was tired all the time, but I remember my grandmother used to say, "Oh, he's all tuckered out." When we got to Great Britain, it was, "He's knackered." And so in the Bible here, it's haggard. I don't know how you say it colloquially, but different expressions for that. So we understand his mood was he was a lovesick puppy. That's what it amounted to. But in love with someone who natural law says he shouldn't be having an affair with. And so Jonadab asked, says, "Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Now, he doesn't say my half-sister, but I'm sure he knows that. Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed, pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down, and she took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out from him. And then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber, that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she had made, brought them into the chamber to Amnon, her brother. But when she brought them near to him, he took hold of her and said, "Come lie with me, my sister." And she answered and said, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel, and do not do this outrageous thing. And as for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her. Being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this is wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence, and bolt the door after her. She's not coming back in." And she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. So Tamar puts ashes on her head, tore the long robe that she wore. She laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now, hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. It was just about the conquest, getting something or having an affair with someone that it was unlawful, even naturally, for him to have. And once that conquest is made, the hatred begins. So continuing, we see Amnon is now going to be punished for this, not by law, which should be, but by Tamar's full brother, Absalom. We're going to see this happen in chapters 13, verses 21 through 33. So when King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Certainly that would be the case. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shearers at Baal-hazar, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Now he's plotting how to kill Amnon, is what we have here. So Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you." He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Then Absalom commanded his servant, says, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine," in other words, when he's drunk. "And when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous, be valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. And while they were on the way, news came to David, "Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left." Now see how gossip spreads and how things can really change from what happened. The king arose, tore his garments, lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by tore their garments. Jonadab. Now remember, Jonadab's the one that plotted this with Amnon for him to fulfill his love desires. He was the son of Shimei, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, all the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead." For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. So what that is telling us is that he took the law into his own hand. Absalom did. And said, "Now therefore, let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." So here comes in this next part, chapters 13, verse 34 through chapter 17, 29, and we'll deal with part of this today, and the rest of it we'll deal with in our next lesson. A second story similar to Nathan's story. And this story is also going to trap David, too, into seeing the attitude that he's showing toward Absalom. He's not writing a letter to get him to come back home. He's not going to permit him to come back home for what he's done, but yet grieving for him to come back home. So how to harmonize that? You see, discipline of children, you hate to do it. And you hate it while you're having to do it. Whether it's verbal, whether it's holding privileges back, whether it's corporal punishment, whatever it might be. When brokenhearted, why not call them in, punish the child, and, that hurts the parent deeper. I used to never understand that when I would hear that, but as I got my children, I come to realize what that means. So what's here, David feels not proper. It's not proper for him to come back. So Joab, the general of the army, is going to intercede. He's not going to come and say, hey, David, you're wrong, because, that's the king. The king could kill him take away his being the commander of the army even. So he's not going to do that. He's got another scheme in mind. So let's begin to look at this, verse 34. Absalom, he begins to flee to Geshur. And the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said, so it has come about. And as soon as he finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. But Absalom fled. He went to Talmah, the son of Ammud, king of Geshur. David mourned for his son Absalom day after day. So he was in mourning for him, but he wouldn't send letters for him to come back. So Absalom fled, went to Geshur, and look how long he was there. 3 years he was there. The spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. Now, chapter 14, verse 1. Now, Joab, he's going to come up with a plan to get David and Absalom reunited. Now, notice his plan here, very similar to what Nathan the prophet did to show David he was the one that was guilty of sacrificing the ewe lamb in his affair with Bathsheba, his lust for her, and then subsequent lying with her, having sex with her. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa, brought from there a wise woman, and said to her, here comes his plan, pretend to be a mourner, put on mourning garments, do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. So she's going to be an actor, or an actress, however you would want to say it. Go to the king, speak thus to him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. He gives her a script. Here's what you're going to say. Maybe she's going to read off a teleprompter. Have people do that today. Some people can't do anything without a teleprompter. Others are good without a teleprompter. But she's got a script from Joab. So when the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, paid homage, and said, save me, O king. Good actress here. And the king said to her, what is your trouble? And she answered, alas, I'm a widow, and my husband is dead. And your servant had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. There was no one to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. Sound familiar? And now the whole clan has risen against your servant, and they say, give up the man who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and so they would destroy the heir also. Thus they would quench my coal that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth. So there's the story. Sounds very familiar to what David's doing. So the king says to the woman, go to your house. I will give orders concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house let the king and his throne be guiltless. Let the guilt be on me, she says. And the king said, if anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again. And then she said, please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood, remember that from our study of cities of refuge, the avenger of blood would be the one that is going to, take the law into their hands. And if the person that committed the murder makes it to the city, he stays there till the high priest dies. Remember, the avenger of blood can't touch him. But if he's out from the city, he can be killed. That's the city's refuge. And so she's talking about the avenger of blood. They still have that law. And my son be not destroyed. In other words, I don't want the avenger of blood now to kill my son. And he said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. And so she sees David is understood. Now he understands her plight. Now she's going to tell him, here's the real story. So she says, please let your servant speak a word to my lord, the king. And he said, speak. And the woman says, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. He can live in the city. Goes outside the cities, cities of refuge. What she's talking about here. Said, now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid, and your servant thought, I will speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear and deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the heritage of God. And your servant thought, the word of my lord the king will set me free, for my lord the king is like the angel of God to discern good and evil. The Lord your God be with you. And so now look at David's answer. The king answered the woman, said, do not hide from me anything I ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king speak. And here's the question. Is the hand of Joab with you in all this? And the woman answered and said, as surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right or the left from anything that my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all these words in the mouth of your servant. In order, here's why, to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. In other words, he did this to help you. She says, but my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know all things that are on the earth. Then the king said to Joab, behold, now I grant this. Go bring back the young man Absalom. Now he's going to allow him to come back, but there's still going to be restrictions. So Joab fell on his face to the ground, paid homage, and blessed David the king. And then he says to him, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, in that the king has granted the request of your servant. So Joab arose, went to Geshur, brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Now, here's the stipulation. You would think he would just restore him full fold. I still have you as a son. Let's move on. But no. He said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. Well, that's not total resolution. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. And now, in all of Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. Now we're going to learn a little more about Absalom. But Absalom's got a plan too. So watch this. Here's his beauty. Maybe looks like Tom Cruise to some of the ladies, or Tom Hanks or somebody like that. You know, certainly doesn't look like me, from the description here anyway. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Perfect. He didn't have to have CoverGirl to help him cover blemishes. He was perfect complexion. Wouldn't you like that, ladies? And when he cut the hair of his head, look how much hair he has. For at the end of every year, he used to cut it, and when it was heavy on him, he cut it. Now look how much it weighed. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels. That would be 6 pounds of hair. That's a lot of hair. That's a lot of weight. Now that's going to come in at the end of his life here in our next study or so. So there's the weight of his hair. There were born to Absalom 3 sons, 1 daughter. The daughter he named Tamar, I'm sure after his sister, and says she, like her aunt, was a beautiful woman. So Absalom, he lives 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming. Can you imagine that? Absalom sent to Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him, and he sent a second time, but Joab would not come. And then he tells his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine. He has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servant set the field on fire. Now that got Joab's attention. So he comes to Absalom, and he says, why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered, behold, I sent word to you, come here, that I may send to the king to ask why I have come from Geshur. It would be better for me to still be there. If I can't be a part of the family, I should have just stayed where I was, basically, is what he's saying here. He said, now therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. I want this over with. I want our relationship restored, in other words. So Joab went to the king, told him, and he summoned Absalom to him. So he came to the king. He bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and watch this, the king kissed Absalom. So this concludes our story this week, our lesson this week of trouble in David's house, from the incest, Amnon with Tamar, Absalom's killing of Amnon, and now we have a restoration, but that's not going to end the story, because we're going to see in our next lesson, chapters 15 through 17, Absalom has got some plans of his own, and he wants to be king. And we're going to see his rebellion. If you found this video helpful and wish to learn more, be sure you download the note card that goes with this lesson and our free 4-lesson Bible correspondence course. You will find the links in the description below. We here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ, meeting at 405 Butler Street in Spring Hill, Louisiana, want to help you with your growth in your knowledge of God's Word. Remember, we are in it for the likes and the subs, so be sure to like us, subscribe to our channel, and tell others. Thanks for watching. In the meantime, in between time, we will see you next time. Cheerio, mate. And with that, Bob's your uncle.